I can't say for certain that I've ever been abducted, or that I even beyond a shadow of a doubt ever had any sort of alien experience whatsoever. However, there's a really weird memory from my childhood, plus one strange occurrence from my adulthood. When I was a little kid, I had episodes where it felt like I was stuck in time while I was watching the TV. I had this weird sort of headache feeling when it happened. Maybe it was some sort of seizure thing. I don't know. One night as a little kid, however, I remember it was late at night. Everyone was asleep, and I was awake, in my parents' room, because I was always scared to sleep by myself. I was in a sort of hazy state of mind and oddly unafraid. So to be honest, I'm not 100% certain I wasn't just dreaming, but I remember that it really did not feel like a dream. I looked out the window of my parents' bedroom, and a figure was holding onto the windowsill from the outside, floating in the air. If there was any archetypal alien that this thing could be classified as, it was definitely a grey. It was a little humanoid figure that stood there about 4 to 5 feet tall or so. It didn't have a giant head like you often see greys depicted as, but instead was much more proportional. I can't remember what its face looked like, but I believe it was sort of like it had no face until it opened its eyes. The figure looked like it was wearing some sort of glowing white shroud all over. It was strange. It looked like there were little holes all over its skin or whatever. It was almost holographic looking, while its tail end, not legs, floated upward into the air and sort of flapped around in the wind, either like it was a shroud or cloak, or like a flame-like thing or something. Maybe that was covering its legs. It was like it was wearing some sort of glowing, holographic cloak thing as it floated in the air. Can't remember what happened after. This figure appeared in my dreams for a few months afterward, as a sort of whimsical, wise, yet childlike teacher. It did not speak out loud. In my dreams, it would speak telepathically. Not like I heard some sort of distinctive voice in my head that sounded a certain way, but like my mind's own voice was speaking what it was saying. I can't really remember all the details, but it definitely did not seem like some sort of cold, emotionless being. At least, in my dreams it didn't. It had a sense of humour. It knew I was fascinated by magic, and wore a magician's top hat in one of my dreams. Anyways, seriously, take this story with a grain of salt. Maybe I was just dreaming, and I had an overactive imagination. But when I look back and think about it, it's really weird to me. Especially considering that I did not have a concept of aliens at the time, let alone greys. I remember thinking this thing was like Casper the Friendly Ghost, and this was in the early 90s in South Florida, where there was a surge of UFO sightings at the time. The other incident was in adulthood. I was with friends driving back towards southeast Florida from the west coast, St. Petersburg, from a concert. It was late at night, pitch dark, and we're on a stretch of road that is surrounded by vast fields on either side. To my left, I see 2 bright orbs in the distance, about 10 to 20 feet off the ground. One was orange and the other was a spinning blue. At first I thought they were towers, but then as we drove past it I realised how strange that would be. Maybe they were. They were just out there in the middle of nowhere, bright as all hell, right next to each other. One a stationary amber and orange, and the other a spinning blue. I believe I've been abducted multiple times, probably about once every 2 or 3 years since I was 8. I've been examined, but nothing invasive was ever done, and the extraterrestrials seemed genuinely curious about humans. More often, it's just an interview via telepathy about how I am feeling and how things are going. The last abduction was about 6 months ago. I remember waking up, seeing figures through my bedroom window make their way into my home, never waking my girlfriend or dogs, and leading me out to their craft. One even seemed fascinated with one of my dogs, but I sort of thought how angry and hurt I would be if anything happened to that dog. and he backed away. I'm not sure what happened, but I've always joked that an alien abduction could explain it. I was a young kid, grade school age. It was a hot summer night and I was headed to bed. I remember sitting in bed and having this bad feeling. More than just a feeling. I knew something was coming to get me. Like a horrifying reoccurrence was about to happen again, that my body remembered but my mind did not. I knew it was close. Possibly it was within eyesight. I was terrified beyond my wits and had no idea of what, but it was going to get me no matter what I did. I hadn't sat down on my bed for more than a few seconds, so it wasn't sleep paralysis. I turned around slowly to scan my room, and just like that, it was the next morning. And I was still dressed and everything, still in mid-turn, except it was the next day. 1 second I was terrified at night, and as I turned around it was the next morning. I felt well rested, yet only a second, which I was awake for, had passed. I went downstairs and got on with my day. I told people what happened, and they just acted like I told them there was grass in the yard, like it was the most mundane thing ever, so I dropped it. I honestly believe this is real, but every time I try and tell it, people laugh. So I watched this movie about aliens, which was like a documentary horror movie. It scared me to death. I couldn't sleep or eat. I had really bad insomnia for about half a year. Ended up sleeping with a baseball bat every night as I was so terrified. I'll just add that I have this thing called extreme empathy, and I found this out through this experience. I was also 16 at the time. I'll just add that owls are very dominant in the film. Anyway, fast forward 6 months to the night I watched the film. I hadn't slept in a few days, so I might have been hallucinating, but it felt like it was so real. A white owl flew through my window and then perched on the end of my bed. Last thing I remember is it coming towards me. I woke up the next day. Slept soundly since. Also, I had a couple of bruises. I can't think about it too much because I'll freak myself out. But it was so strange, and the fact I've never had issues sleeping since is weird. I cannot go near an owl to this day without having a slight panic attack though. Still to this day, I can't explain this, but it seems similar to some other people's experiences. I was around 14 or 15-ish and was asleep in my room. I woke up in the middle of the night, sat up, turned around, and looked at my phone to see the time, which was around 1 AM. I turned back around and just sat there staring at my wall. I remember at the time I wasn't really thinking about anything. I was just staring blankly at my bedroom wall. It was like my brain was asleep, but my body was awake and aware. For what seemed about 2 minutes of me sitting up and staring at the wall, my mum burst into my room. Her coming in so abruptly in the middle of the night startled me and broke whatever trance I seemed to be in. She said she had a funny feeling that she needed to come in and check on me to make sure I was okay. I told her everything was fine and that I'd just woken up randomly. When she finally left, I looked at my phone again and it was 4:37 AM. I'd been sitting up staring at my wall for over 3 hours. And still to this day, I don't know what it was or why I did that, or what woke my mum up out of a dead sleep to come check on me. It still gives me the spooks 6 years later. Not my story, but my father-in-law swears he was abducted on a camping trip in the northern Appalachians with about 4 other people. They hiked up near a lake and set up a campsite and set up camp. He says they all remember swimming, then eating dinner, but no one remembers cleaning up camp or going into the tents. They woke up about 10 yards away from their original site, in the exact formation that they had set up the camp, but all of the little stuff was in the same spot, and there was no fire in the middle of the original area, but not in the new one. They pulled out a measuring tape my father-in-law had in his backpack from work, and measured the distance between the stakes of the tent poles, and it was the exact distance between all of the tent poles from where they originally were, and the new area. And before anyone says anything, my father-in-law is a super light sleeper, according to my mother-in-law, and doesn't drink or do drugs, has no history or symptoms of mental illness, and was the first one awake. He still refuses to go hiking on that trail to this day. And it's an easy hike, so he isn't trying to be lazy and get out of it. One time I had to sleep in my parents' bedroom because they were the only ones with heat in their room for a few days. On one particular night, I remember my dad's alarm going off at 4:30 AM. I got up and sat in the kitchen for a while until he left, and then I went to my own room to sleep because I was tired of sleeping on the floor. I remember laying on my bed and looking at my dresser that has a mirror. My room was very dark, but I saw a reflection in the mirror at the edge of my bed of a tall, shadowy figure. I watched it for a minute, wondering what it is in my room that could make that figure. My heart sank when I saw it move. I was so fixated on the reflection in the mirror, too afraid to look down the bed at what was really there. I couldn't move a muscle, as I saw it climb in the bed with me. But I remember having such a terrified, dreadful feeling. I felt my bed dip as someone climbed in and heard the squeaks. Next thing I knew, I opened my eyes and it's morning time. I looked everywhere in my room and didn't see anything. I tried telling my mum what happened, but I just started crying. I felt so dirty, so invaded, so empty. I couldn't figure it out. I've joked with my significant other before that maybe I was abducted and probed by aliens, or maybe I was raped by a demon. Call me crazy, and maybe there was a logical explanation, but I've never felt so gross and terrified at the same time like that before. I remember when I was 9, I was paralysed in my bed. All of a sudden, this blue light shines through the bedroom window. I see my covers fall off to the floor as I get lifted through the window. I remember bits and pieces of being on a table in a room as other children are being examined too. There was a tall creature that looked like a praying mantis in a robe over me that put these needles in my legs. It didn't hurt, and it was talking to me telepathically about the procedure helping me walk. During that time, I had issues with my legs and had a difficult time walking. I black out and wake back up in my bed minus the covers that were now on the floor. I had 3 needle marks on each leg where I remember the creature putting them. Ever since, I was able to walk a lot better and had no more problems. I also witnessed an abduction in 2001 that involved witnessing a granddaughter of an elderly couple get taken. So, I'm gonna sound like I'm a fucking lunatic. My sister and I have similar experiences. We'd never discussed it until about a month ago when I was like, yo, pretty sure we were abducted. And I guess we went through the same stuff. When I was around 6, I'd always tell my dad how I couldn't wait to go back to bed and see the aliens. I remember being really young and wishing they would come take me away. I could have just been a fucked up kid though. I don't remember being taken or anything. I don't think it was one of those situations where they physically take you away, but just enter your mind when you're asleep. I'm positive it had something to do with my grandmother's house. I guess my sister had her worst night terrors there. It was there that I had my first dream about this ghost boy. I dreamt of him nearly every night for about a decade. He was my boyfriend, and he told me about Japanese and German people coming over on boats to do experiments on us in space. It's a really long story, but I'm convinced it was my relationship and the shit we did together that's fucked up my ovaries and reproductive system so much. Apparently, my sister had similar dreams. She had horrible night terrors of the same man every night. It really fucked with our family, because we'd always be jolted awake by her screams and my parents lost so much sleep. I personally was just pissed that her freakouts were interrupting my dates with Ghost Kid. Both of us have a lot of unexplained health problems. We're kinda psychic. We always joke that she's electric, because things will stop working around her for no reason, or she'll touch something like a radio that's been broken for 20 years, and it will come back to life. We'll dream the same dreams. I wake up with nosebleeds all the time. We both hear ringing in our ears when no one else does. Again, we just joke that we're having stigmata seizures. We still have the scariest dreams about my grandmother's house. I don't know if it was a hotbed for paranormal activity or what, and it's possible that our experiences have more to do with ghostly spirit stuff than aliens. Whatever. I know this doesn't sound relevant to some people, but apparently we have most of the signs of being former abductees. Or we could just be insane sisters with health issues. This freaked me out for a couple of weeks. It was so real that I found myself googling alien abductions for days after. I struggled to get to sleep and had to take a little NyQuil just to settle myself. Anyway, it was the best I can remember from 5 years ago. I was sitting in something like a small movie theatre with the lights on. There were a few other people in there with me, maybe about 10 of us. I was strapped into my chair, strap across my waist and one across my chest. All of a sudden, my chair lifted up to the roof and tilted so I was facing the floor. The strap across my waist was tight and lifted my top, slightly revealing my belly. I felt self-conscious that my belly fat was on show and moved my arm to adjust my top. Then the chair moved to my left at speed into a dark space. Next thing I know, I'm in my bed at home lying on my front, which I never do, and on top of the blankets. I remained still as I woke up and was trying to figure out what the hell just happened. I lay there listening for a while and could hear some scuffling. After a few minutes, I moved my foot a few inches to feel for my cat. He didn't wake up, which was not like him. I then heard a clear, quiet voice say, "She is waking up." I froze, with my heart beating at a crazy rate. I lay there for 3 hours, scared. Too scared to move or switch the light on. My husband and cat peacefully slept while I was traumatized by the whole experience. Even when daylight came and I was up and about, I was still in fear. I told my husband and he just laughed. I had never had a dream like that before or one since. Not my story, but comes from my family. My great-great-grandfather, last name Aldro, built a road to the top of a mountain. Not a huge mountain, but a mountain nonetheless, and built his house up there and appropriately named it Aldro Hill. And this is located in New York, though most of the property on the hill is now owned by other people, and quite a bit of it is owned by the state for campgrounds and such. My grandfather, who is certainly a drinker, but has no history of drug use or mental illness, told me a story years ago about how when he was a kid, he'd explore and climb the trees on the hill, and how one day late evening, he climbed a large crabapple tree on the edge of a field, and in the field, he saw mysterious alien-like figures. He was afraid to make any noise because he didn't know what they were, but the branch he was on cracked, and the figures looked in his direction. He said he tried to take himself out of the line of sight by moving behind the truck, and that when he looked back out to the field mere seconds later, there was no sign of the figures anywhere. He said he hightailed it back to his grandfather's and never explored the hill again. Now, my grandfather is no bullshitter, but I'm a skeptic and found the story hard to believe. But my mum, on a separate occasion, shared with me an experience she had on the hill. Again, no history of mental illness or drug use, and certainly not a bullshitter. She told me when she was 16, her and my aunt were at her grandfather's house on the hill, my grandfather's dad, who inherited his father's property when he passed away. She said they explored a bit too, since the area has plenty of woods, but when they got back on the road to go back up to the top, an aircraft flying dangerously low zipped above them over the road at what she called fighter jet speeds. She said all she remembers was hearing it first, then looking up and seeing the bottom, which had a strange coloured light on it, fly over them, but within the same microsecond, it was gone. I'm not sure if my grandfather ever told her his story, or if she or my aunt ever shared their experience with him, but it was certainly enough for me to decide never to go to that hill.